Welcome back to part 3 of the Excel crash course. In this video we're going to spend some time doing more with formulas, copying formulas, and also learning about absolute and relative references. To do this we're going to build a spreadsheet for another made-up company. This time it'll be Fred's Filaments. So I'll go ahead and put Fred's right up here. And what we're going to do is an analysis of Fred's fixed and variable costs to see at what point he'll break even based on sales of his spools of 3D printing filament. First, we need to build our model of Fred's business. This model is going to include the sales price. So we'll just go ahead and type in sales price. And then we need to get his fixed costs. Then we also need to get his variable costs, and these would be costs that every unit these costs apply. So when he sells 5, then he has 5 of them. If he sells 1,000, he has 1,000. Fixed costs would be things like building rent. And we're going to put in salaries, and for this case we'll just assume that everybody that works at Fred's Filaments is on salary so that we have a steady cost for this. Otherwise it could be going up and down based on hours worked and some other things, and that'll just simplify our spreadsheet. Let's call that our total fixed costs. And then we have some variable costs, and we're going to use the spools that he winds the filament onto. We'll have the filament itself and some shipping costs per spool. Let's widen this column. And I'd kind of like to slightly indent the sub items. So for example, under fixed costs, I'd like to indent building rent and salaries just because it will look better. And here in the Home tab, we have this push right, which will just make a little bit of an indent there so they stand out. Let's do that on our variable costs as well. And let's make up some numbers. Before we make up numbers, I noticed that salaries is sticking out over the edge of this column, so I'm going to double click between A and B just to get my column width a little better. Let's assume that Fred can sell a spool of filament for $14.95. That his building rent per month is $27,000. That his salaries per month are $25,000. And so that would create a fixed cost of, well, I could do a couple ways here. I could do a formula equal to 27,000 plus 25,000, and that would work. I can also use my sum function, and there are two ways to go about that. One is to put your cell pointer at the bottom of a column and then click auto sum, and what it'll do is it will sum the column above that. You could also select the whole column plus one extra cell and hit auto sum, and that will actually compute the formula and drop it into the cell for you. And then the third option, and I'm going to hit Control Z, which is undo. You also have an undo key up here at the top of your spreadsheet. And I'm going to just type the formula in raw. So equal to sum, open parenthesis. So sum is the name of my function. This open parenthesis says everything that comes now is parameters that go into my sum. And then I'm going to use my mouse and select the range that I want in the sum. Remember that a range is a group of cells that touch each other. And you would identify the range starting with the top left cell and ending with the bottom right. In this case, there's just 2, so it's B6 through, and the colon there means through. So B6 through B7. I'm going to close my parenthesis and hit enter, and that will give me the sum of both of those items. Okay, we'll say the spools are 79 cents a spool, and that he puts $7.26 into each spool of filament, and that there are shipping costs of $2.97. And I forgot to indent shipping costs, so let's go ahead and do that. And that gives us total variable costs. And again, I could type my sum function, or I can select them all and click auto sum, or I could just click at the bottom of the column and hit auto sum, and we get to the same place pretty much either way. I also want an underline to separate my numbers from my totals. So I'm going to click in cell B7, and then under the Home tab in the font section we have a border box, and I'm going to choose bottom border and then click off of that, and that'll leave this nice bottom border. I'll do the same thing for my variable costs, and under shipping costs I'll click bottom border. So that looks just a little bit nicer. Now that gives us the data that we need to create a model for different levels of sales for Fred's Filament. So the question would come up is, let's make a sales column. If he sells 1,000 units, what will his profit be? If he sells 2,000 units, what will his profit be? So we can create a model based on the numbers that we have here that will allow us to analyze what his break-even point is and what his profit will be at different levels of sales. Now, I could type in 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and I could just keep typing, and let's go from like 1 to 30,000, but that gets tedious, and there's a faster way. So Excel has built into it something called the fill handle. And the fill handle is on your selected cells. At the bottom right corner, there's a little tiny block. And if you grab that block, notice when I roll over it, my cursor will change from the wider white plus to the thinner black plus. And when I have that thinner black plus, I can click and drag that fill handle, and notice that it's allowing me to copy it down, and it's incrementing it based on the pattern that was evidenced in the cells that I had selected. So let's go down to 30,000 and let up. So I'm going to do that again. Control Z, undo. If I select just one of these and start copying down, it doesn't get the pattern, or it might try to add one to them. But if you select the two of them, it says, oh, they're 1,000 apart, so as you copy down, it's going to follow that pattern and give you numbers that are 1,000 apart. It's pretty cool. Some other things we could do with fill handle. For example, we could say day 1, day 2, and then we could start copying that, and it's going to take that number at the end of day and actually increment it for us. Pretty sweet. We could also, whoops, let's delete what's in there. So delete. We could also do something like January, February, and then I could select those and pull down, and it gives me the months, weekdays, and it's also smart enough to handle other patterns. So I could do like 3, 6, and now that's going to go up by 3s, and then I could copy it, and it's going up by 3s. So there's just a lot you can do with the fill handle. It's a nice tool. And in our case, we've used it to create sales of 1 to 30,000. Now we need to create a formula that will show our net profit. And I wanted to do this because the formula is just a little bit more complicated than what your formula would have been in the last example. So in this case, net profit, what is the formula? Well, net profit is equal to revenues minus fixed costs plus sales in units, or units sold, times variable costs. But wait, what are revenues? Well, revenues are actually sales price, or price, times units. Whoops, and I just confused it. Let me put a single quote at the front of that formula, and that'll keep it as text. So let's change the sales to units sold so it matches our formula. And now we can build this formula and calculate what our revenue or our net profit would be based on the numbers we have on the left side. The next question would be, what's going on with the parentheses? And we have to deal with something called order of operations. In Excel, order of operations means that when it looks at a formula, how does it calculate it? And the answer is that first it does parentheses, next it does exponents, so second would be exponents, and exponents are that. And then third, it does multiply and divide. And then last, or fourth, it does plus and minus, or add and subtract. So what happens if it has two things that are at the same level, like times and divide? It will work left to right and do them. However, if the times or divide happens to be inside parentheses, then it gets bumped up to the level of the parentheses. So for example, in this formula, price times unit and fixed costs plus units times variable costs are both inside parentheses, so they would happen early on. Well, which one happens first? The one on the left. So price times unit would happen first, then fixed costs plus unit weight plus happens after multiply. So units times variable cost would happen first, and then that would get added to the fixed costs. And then, so now you have price times units, which is your revenues, you have your total costs, and you would subtract that out, and that would give you your net profit. So let's try that in a formula. So equal to, and what is my price? So my price is B3, and I'm going to multiply that times units sold, which is D3, and then I'm going to subtract from that my fixed costs, 52,000, plus my unit cost, $11.02, times my number of units, which is back to the 1,000. And I got those last two backwards, so just to keep it the same as my formula here, let's do units and then our total variable costs. All right, so what is our net profit if we sell 1,000 units? And the answer is we lose $48,070. Oh, bad. The next thing we want to do is copy this formula down, and we really don't want to do that by typing it in again and typing it in again, because it's kind of painful to type the formula in. So what I want to do is just grab the old fill handle and drag it down, and I'm just going to do a few of them so you can see what happens. And oh, bad, that is not what we were trying to do. So let's take a look at these formulas and see why they're messed up. So this one was working, and it's B3 times D3 minus B8 plus D3 times B15. Okay, so I'm going to go down to the next one and look at the cells that it's trying to access. They're all down one from where we were before. Now with the 2,000, we want that to be down one, but for the sales price, the fixed costs, and the variable costs, we don't want those to change. So how can we keep those constant when we copy the formula, but allow the D3 in our formula to change, because we want that to be the next row? Excel provides an answer to that, and it's called absolute versus relative cell references. Right now we're using relative cell references, which means that when I copy my formula, if I copy it down one, then all of the row numbers are going to change by 1. If I copy it to the right one, then all of my column addresses are going to change by 1 letter. Everything is relative to where you started it from. But when we copy this, we don't want B3, which is our sales price, to change. So what we're going to do is put $ in front of the B and in front of the 3. And what the $ says is if this formula gets copied, this B is locked. So you can almost think of that $ as a padlock, saying that if I copy this formula, B doesn't change. If I copy this formula, 3 doesn't change. But I want D3 to change, so I'm going to leave that unlocked. And then what do we do with B8? Well, B8 is this purple box. We don't want that to move down one when we copy the formula down, so we're going to lock it in. And technically, I could just lock part of the formula because I'm not copying it left and right. So I could just put the lock in front of the 8. It's just sometimes easier to just look at it and say, oh, the whole thing's locked. But this would also be valid. And then D3 we want to keep, but B15 we want to lock again. We're not copying left and right, but we do want to lock the 15. So there I've got that locked. That looks good. And now, if I hit enter, it doesn't change my output, but if I copy this formula, you can see that it's now working. Let's finish copying this down. And there I've got, for each of these units sold, I have what my profit would be. And if we sell 30,000 units, we get 65,900 in profit. Woohoo! Where's break even? Well, break even is somewhere between 13,000 and 14,000. And there are a couple of ways that we could get to break even. The easiest one at this point would be to use a tool built into Excel and have it calculate it for us, but let's go ahead and just estimate it with trial and error. So I'm going to copy these formulas. And actually I could copy any of these, so it doesn't matter which one. Let's go to the bottom and just pull it down one more. And we know it's between 13 and 14,000. So let's guess 13,500. That's still positive. Let's guess 13,250. Still positive. 13,200. Uh-oh, negative. 13,225. So if I keep doing this, eventually I'll range in on it. 13,235. Too high. 13,233. 13,232. 13,231. So it looks like the first place where I am positive would be 13,232 units. So this would be my break-even point. What we covered in this was absolute and relative cell addresses, how to use the fill handle to copy formulas, and also the order of operations. When do I use absolute cell addresses? Your best clue of when to use it is when you copy a formula. Let's copy these, copy, and then you paste it somewhere else and things don't come out right. And then you start to say, oh, that's a problem. Why did this formula not come out right? Well, it's because I copied it 1, 2, 3, 4 cells to the right. So instead of looking at this number, it ended up looking at some other number. We can tell by double clicking on it. So we had a sales price, but then we had costs of 0. So everything was positive. Why is it doing that? Because I locked the row, but I did not lock the column. So let's go back into this formula. We're going to lock the column, which is B, so $B, and the column, $B. And now if I copy these, copy, paste, it works because because those formulas were absolute.